in my experience at least, the thing you don't want is someone saying, cool, that would be interesting. Like that is a false sense of positivity that you're on path to product market fit. We used to do this exercise at Atlassian called build a box. I don't know if you've heard this, like where you actually like used to buy software in a box. What goes on the box, like a box of cereal? What is the headline? What are like the features on the side panel that are like super important? On the back, you want like the tech specs. At some companies that I've seen, it's almost so, they're like hard silos. Like product management must do this. Once they're done with that, then design will do this. And once they're done with that, engineering will do this. And that has so much inefficiency. Designers having more tools available to them, they can often just do the product management. In my experience, like you maybe don't even like need a product manager there in the future for a lot of these teams. And I think that is a really positive evolution of the craft of like having a designer who can think that way. And then the question for a product manager, if they didn't have to do half of what they're doing today, and that could be distributed elsewhere, which might be some to a designer, like what are the other things that this glue role can do? It might be going out and doing a bunch more research. It might be sitting down with the finance team and understanding like how to price this new thing you're building.
Hi folks, my name is Arseni and this is Product Craft. Today's episode is with Brian Swift, co-founder and CEO of Twine. Prior to starting Twine, Brian held product leadership roles at companies you've probably heard before: Atlassian, Dovetail, Twitter, Zynga, and more. Prior in this show, had a lot of conversations with designers, and I'm surely going to have a lot more. But this is the first episode of this series that leans more into the product management side of things, and I'm really excited to bring that perspective. With Brian, we cover a wide range of topics, from how he first got into product to the massive shifts happening in the field due to AI. I was curious to dive into some of the fundamental things about product management, such as feature prioritization, product market fit, understanding customer pain points. As you saw in the teaser, we also talked about what blending of the roles may look like. I was also really impressed with how much Brian and his team are able to achieve with just 4 in-house people and no contractors. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment below. It really helps the channel grow and means a lot. Welcome to Product Craft, Brian.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I wanted to kick us off by asking you, how did you get into the world of digital product development? Like what sparked your interest to tip your toes and enter this crazy world?
It was really an accident, to be honest. I studied more hardware engineering actually when I was in university and worked in semiconductors for the first portion of my career. I eventually found my way worked in finance and thought I was going to go more of a business route, which wasn't for me. I really wanted to get back to technology. And I happened to stumble into a startup based out of Boston. And I was doing more just analytics and business stuff, helping with some of the finance tracking and analytics of the product usage. It was a B2C product. And I reported to the VP of product. And that's really why this whole part of my career started. I didn't know at the time what a stand-up was. I knew generally what designers and engineers did. I had no idea what a product manager was. And this was well over a decade ago, to give some perspective. And working with that first VP of product and learning how to ship features at that time and just understand all that went into it, I thought that it might be this thing that combines a lot of different parts of my skill set and experiences, but also my passion. And it just kind of took off from there.
What is your passion?
Not the plan. My passion has always been I was an athlete for a lot of my early career, like in high school, and I like working with teams. And so I think just working with a team of engineers and designers and people who come from different backgrounds to bring different skill sets to the table, I really enjoyed that part of it. Then I think just applying technology in a way that is novel and useful is always fun, exciting, stressful at times.
Yeah.
But I've always been a bit of a tinkerer and trying out new things. And so being able to apply that in my everyday job was very exciting.
How has the understanding of what product development is morphed from those like early days when you were just starting out and just starting, just beginning to explore the profession? into what you know today after working with several high profile, like world-class teams? Like, I don't know, how how much how much your understanding expanded, so to speak, and what are like some of the maybe key things that you would say to aspiring product managers who are starting out?
I think I was quite fortuitous. This might be a unintuitive answer to this question, but no one really told me what product management was when I first started. And I think that helped. Is basically trying to fill the gaps around the product teams that I was working with and figure out, okay, how do we build something compelling for our customers? Well, I need to understand our customers. They are comparing us to other alternative solutions or substitute workflows. I need to understand those and how we can differentiate. And then I'm getting questions from our CEO about the business and how this is actually going to make money. What's our long-term strategy and plan? And because at that time I approached it from more first principles, I think that to me was product management, because that is what the company and team needed from me at that time. I think over the fast forward now, it's years later, I think there's a lot of literature around product management. I think there was, of course, back then, a lot more now. And I think sometimes it abstracts away from the actual core things that I believe product management is responsible for at a company. And of course, it changes as the company grows. But I think now a lot of people associate product management with certain frameworks or ways of working, as opposed to what the core craft is, which is a bit amorphous compared to design and engineering.
Yeah, let's double click into that. Like, I'm really curious to hear your take of what you consider the core, the essence of product management, as opposed to what, traditional frameworks may say.
And this might be at odds with what others may say. I think that's the core. Product management is mostly a glue for the organization, and a very important glue, but one that isn't always required in the early days of a company necessarily. I think often it's like a founder is the glue, and that is their job, in my experience and my journey so far. But eventually things start to break down, and being able to connect what you're building to the market, understanding customer needs and how those are evolving, and keeping the whole company rallied around a vision and strategy. Eventually the product management function begins to emerge and be required. And then as a company grows, a lot of the internal stakeholder management bucket of work becomes more and more important as the glue. But I think at its core, the function should exist to do those three buckets that I had said. Work with a team to ship a product. So there's the efficiency of just the day-to-day of how do you build, of working with a team. There's make that product useful to a subset of the market that you care about and differentiate it for them. So that's understanding the customer and how you can map your technology and differentiate it to them and solve their needs, and then help the business grow effectively. And so understanding the commercial side of what you're doing and the implications of it. And I think if you can piece those three things together, that is what the product management function is. And as a company grows, leaning into other aspects of it becomes more and more important. And the whole like rallying a company around what you're doing becomes more important. But I think those are in service of those first three primary tasks.
What is this delta between what people believe product management to be versus like maybe your personal lived experiences?
At the risk of generalizing, I think what I've noticed a lot over the last 10 years as I've been like really immersed in the craft is that a lot of the what I would call bucket of work that is more monotonous, just task driven, things like creating a backlog of features for a team to discuss, writing down every little bit of feedback into some document that you think through, running meetings to get everyone aligned on jobs to be done or whatever framework you're using. And I think people have, because for a number of macro reasons, there's probably a bit of overhiring in some companies. At least I think now in retrospect, it's easy to say that, but it's certainly been as someone who's managed a product management function. If I could go back, I probably would have done it a bit differently. But I think too often product managers associate their craft with those tasks, which are a means to an end rather than the actual work. And I think I know not to jump ahead in this conversation, but I think AI now and that and how it can give everyone in every function a bit of superpower makes these things even more evident. And I think it can lead to a bit of a crisis in product management, or at least some people who associate themselves with the job with those tasks that can now be mostly automated. And to answer your question more directly, I think some of the work about the work has become synonymous with the job more than it probably should.
Yeah, no, and I think let's dive right into the AI and how it impacts the industry, and specifically, the craft of product management and other roles as well. I think that's a good time as any. Like, what are some of the biggest changes so far that you're seeing that are happening with AI taking more of the center stage, so to speak?
The way, maybe I'll answer this with a framework that I use just in my role, but I use this as a product person, but I use it even more now as a founder. I think you often would encourage people to think about their role as, what do I need to focus on this month? I do a check-in every month. What can I automate away? In the past, there wasn't that much you could automate away, but now there's so much more that you can automate, and I'll come back to that. What can I delegate or hand off to other people in the organization? And then what can I just completely eliminate from my job? And so that's typically how I think about how I spend my time as a founder. I think it's also useful as a product manager, and figuring out what you can automate. The capability of what you can automate is drastically. So really anything that's a repeatable task with a repeatable outcome that you actually going to get out of that task, that is important and something that you need to do, but it just takes a lot of your time if you're doing it. And being 90 or 80 to 90% correct, however you define correct, is an acceptable outcome. I think those are the things that you can automate. And I think every month, every week, even as these like new models come out, we just had some new ones come out today for AI, which we've just been playing around with this morning. I think you find that you feel more comfortable automating parts of the job to this. And so things like writing requirement docs, I think they can accelerate that, creating prototypes. There's a whole bucket of work that I think can help.
What do you think then the role of the experienced product manager becomes with this kind of augmentation and automation, right? Like, one may think like, well, AI can just generate, like it's going to do a perfect job if I'm going to, write a prompt, and it's going to look very good. It's going to look great, right? So like, what is then this distinction between the AI outputs and the actual value that the human is going to bring?
There still needs to be a human in the loop in all this that I'm describing. So I think thinking of your job as more of an orchestrator rather than a doer of menial tasks is the way I like it. So asking an AI to write a PRD is only going to be as good as the human's input and like extra layer on the final 10% of that document. And so I think the way I would think of it is the act of writing it out and the writer's block that comes along with that, and just structuring it and making it sound cohesive and coherent for a audience in the organization. I think you can offload that to the AI. However, it's only going to be good based on your own knowledge of the market, the customer, the strategy, which again, I think AI is, the good thing it's doing is it's accentuating the core craft of product management and allowing you to outsource these more menial tasks, which is for me like a great shift. I think for some it can be quite challenging, but it allows you to focus your energy on things that matter and require human creativity and intuition.
Product market fit, that's one of the biggest pitfalls and most important things for any startup, at least. And so what are the ways or methods that you found to find, that secret product market fit? Like, can AI help with that, or is it still largely up to the human to figure it out, and the intuition and the experience?
It's definitely still up to a human. I think product market fit, if I had some like secret formula, I would be using it repeatedly for starting companies. But I think it's a hard thing to do. And I think the reason, I was actually speaking with someone a couple weeks ago, and they said, often these things are quite simple, but not easy. So simply, you just need to build something that people need. There's a burning pain. There's an economic value associated with that pain, and you can solve it in a novel way. And there's enough of those people out there that it's worth your time. That's really all finding product market fit is. And I think AI, again, can accelerate your journey to that. You can build a product much faster than before. You can prototype ideas much quicker. And just generally, you can now with just call recording software, you can talk to anyone in the world at any moment, really. And all those hurdles go away, but it doesn't necessarily, so it makes it simpler, but it's not really any easier because now everyone has this capability as well. The playing field's just kind of shifted a bit. So I think in order to truly find product market fit, you need to deeply understand your customer, the market, be able to storytell in a way that is compelling to those customers and allow them to see your vision of the better way or the future or where things are going. Because I think people still often, I know there are plenty of PLG products in the world, but they're still buying from a group of individuals or a brand or humans that have created this thing that they feel somewhat attached to or really want to hitch their reputation to. And so I think, AI makes it quicker to get there, but everyone can now get there quicker. And so the important parts of like deeply understanding the people and their role is just more important than it ever was.
What are some of your favorite or like trusted methods that you've used to identify like whether or not you're on the right path, right? So let's say you have an idea, you have a hunch, you're like, okay, there may be something to it. I mean, the common knowledge is, well, let's build some sort of MVP, some sort of prototype, put it in front of users, get the feedback. I'm curious, like, is that how you think about it as well? Like, and what does it look like in real life for you?
In exact science, it's very hard to figure out. But I think in my experience, at least, the thing you don't want is someone saying, looks, that's cool. That would be cool. Like that is a false sense of positivity that you're on path to product market fit. And I think, especially if you're talking to people in your own network, there is just like the human thing of they don't want to let you down. And some people don't like to make other people feel bad usually. So the thing I have found useful is when you get an actual emotional reaction from someone. And there are two stages to like the problem. So when you ask them about the problem you're trying to solve, do they get it when they talk about it? Do they almost like use expletives when they're describing the problem? Like then you're on to something that really resonates and matters to someone. And then when you're in solution mode, which could be prototypes, we tend to now just build, at least at our company, build stuff and just get in the hands of people because we can do that so quickly. And you can see whether or not they have an emotional reaction to it. And it doesn't have to be positive. Sometimes a negative emotional reaction allows you to see that you're hitting on something or taking a different approach that is novel. And maybe they're just a laggard who, especially now with AI, like you're automating a thing that they think should be their job. And so they have a very strong negative emotional reaction to it, not necessarily you or the product, but like, I would never use this. And then you go find, okay, there's probably an early adopter or another company that's at a different stage that will have the exact opposite reaction. So you're kind of looking for those emotive responses. And then once you actually put something in their hands, do they tell other people about it is the ultimate thing. Like, is there word of mouth growth? And if they're not willing to like brag that they're using your product, or when their peers or someone else says, how did you solve this problem? And they want to tell them about you, that's a sign that you're really on to product market fit. And of course that they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah. What is so at the stage where there is no prototype yet, or nothing to put in the hands of a potential user, how do you go about collecting those pain points and like trying to figure out, the actual problems and challenges to solve? Like, is it kind of from just lived experiences? You talk to people, you hear about something, you sort of develop a hunch, or maybe it's surveys, maybe there's like a systematic way or a little bit of everything.
I have to personally rely on, if you have lived experience, that really helps. But still, I think you need to talk to people. I think surveys, of course, can help, but I think that's a supplemental data set. So doing more traditional, like deep research into people's pains and their day in the life type analysis, and what are those big things that are holding them back, and what is that holding them back from? And then I think that's how you find the pain. And I don't even know how to do that without talking to people, to be honest. Like before we made the decision to start this company, for instance, I think we spoke to at least 50 people across a variety of functions just to understand and dig and not lead the witness, just try to be, neither of us are researchers, but try to be put on our best researcher and just ask open-ended questions, see if they're all leading us to the same or a similar area. So that allows you to find an opportunity, but then why hasn't that not been solved? What is your unique take or insight into that space that others are missing? And I think that's the part that you need to think through, because if you don't have an insight that others don't, or through a technology that can be applied to this problem and it hasn't been done so before, the other thing that you have to ask yourself is like, well, why isn't this solved? If this is such what people care about, surely someone's thought about this before.
Yeah.
And that's not a reason to put it aside. It's usually like, okay, well, get the answer to that question. And if that fires you up and feels like you can tell a story around that, then you're probably onto something.
If we were to take kind of the walk down the memory lane a little bit to the early days of Twine, maybe even before you knew that it's going to be called Twine, like how did you discover the pain point and like what it was? What did you notice and how did you go about the process? Like, did you deliberately decide like, I'm going to start a company and I wanted to be in this space and I'm going to start doing research about this? Or how did what served as this catalyst?
Twine solves a problem that I've experienced and lived. So it was always percolating the background. That's where the initial idea came from. I think it took me working with other founders to have the confidence that I could even do this.
So what was the problem that you discovered?
As I had a VP of product at growing B2B SaaS companies, I struggled to make sense of what customers wanted from us. Most of the companies I worked at were a combination of a product-led growth motion and then layering on a sales, customer success-led, a more enterprise motion. And what I found is that over time, at everywhere I worked, the go-to-market org, which are specifically sales and customer success, and product, and when I say product, I mean product engineering design, would diverge over time. Like they have different perspectives, they have different incentives, and that muddies the what should we build, how do we work together to actually win this market, which we can only do by building really compelling software. So once large language models started to become more mainstream and far more capable and accessible, it was like, I think we can solve this problem. So if a customer across the world is complaining about my product area to a BDR that I've never even met before, I want to know that immediately. So almost immediately, how do I make that happen? Or if I have a business question about what's preventing renewals in this segment of the customer, the answer is on those calls. It's just very hard to get to. And it's not intuitive for a CSM or an AE to speak and think like a product manager and vice versa. So a lot of things get lost in translation. So we just decided to try to go fix that and build essentially like an AI assistant that thinks like a product manager, can go through every single call and pull out the key moments that matter, generate a bunch of reports and route information around the whole organization.
So it comes down to, and I think that this is the kind of the promise of Twine about getting the right customer insights, right? To understand what the customers want. Is that correct?
It's a big part of it. An interesting thing about my experience is my whole career mostly has been product management. I ran a go-to-market function most recently. So I actually went to the other side of this equation, was responsible for revenue, was sitting on sales calls, and started to pick up that there are these like little moments, maybe 60 seconds, where they compare you to a competitor, or they say something about your product that someone in the product org needs to know. And it's a little nugget of information or an insight, as you called it. I, in this instance, because I had been the head of product at the same company, knew who to go talk to. But as the company's going to grow and there are hundreds of people having these calls every day, finding these like little needles or nuggets of gold, needles in the haystack or nuggets of gold are hard. And so this is a great application of AI. Go through these things that is impossible just in sheer time of day to go through and go tell the people who need to know automatically.
That's really cool. Yeah. So would it be like, or is essentially an agent that sits like on a Zoom call and listens to all the conversations, or how does it integrate into the data?
Most sales and CS teams are already recording their calls. So there are a lot of great products out there that help with sales coaching and just understanding, tracking deals. We integrate with those and grab the transcript and the video file and process it through a bunch of our own proprietary AI to find all these key things that a product manager would look for, a product marketer would look for, a founder might look for, a head of sales might look for. And through analyzing what is said, the way in which it's said, the tone of voice, the sentiment. We can all these little nuggets and cut the video clips such that someone who wasn't on the call would understand and hear directly from the customer rather than an internal interpretation, which is going to be kind of lossy just by the nature of how humans communicate. And
Yeah.
so we just try to short circuit that whole process.
Yeah. So I think it's it's an interesting, almost like a circle, so to speak, where the product that you founded, it is solving, I mean, as you described, the very need and pain point that you had as head of product, trying to figure out what is it that customers want. So it's so the solution in a sense of Twine, that's more of this automated agent, so to speak, right? It's doing the work on the background. It sends the snippets and nuggets to the correct people. What is your take on this type of automation as opposed to a more traditional user research where, you go out specifically to a customer, you ask the questions, like, is it something that you think should be done together in conjunction? Like where would you use one versus another? Yeah.
They sit side by side. It's definitely not meant to replace that at all. I think doing research and having conversations going deep, whether it's generative research or surveys or whatever it is, that is another very useful exploration of understanding the market and your customer base. What happened, the way sales calls and customer success calls are as a data set are quite different, right? Like the purpose of those calls is to close deals and support your customer. And the way that it's usually not worth it, it's a negative ROI use of time for a product manager to go through every sales call and watch them all. Like it's a good practice to like just do a little bit, but you just don't have that many hours in the day. There's far more sales calls happening every day than there are research calls. And how do you just get those little nuggets? And so that's what we're trying to solve, that problem. And then you have several others that product teams need to look at. Another very important one, which is research, which requires a much deeper dive into every second of that conversation, is quite useful and important as a product person relative to a sales call.
I oftentimes hear from, let's say, a commercial team about like, look, we're out in the field. This is what we're hearing. This is what our customers need. Let's do this tomorrow. We're going to be able to close the sale. And then the product manager is like, okay, how do I manage that request with 300 other requests that I already have on the backlog? What would be your maybe trick method to suggest to those who are trying to figure out, okay, I have the data. There is no shortage of potential features to build and the potential ideas. How do you make sense and prioritize all of that?
So a couple things on the, hey, we have this great idea of let's go build this conversation with the salesperson. I think the biggest problem with that data set today is it's very inconsistent. It's not comprehensive. Like that's an anecdote, but that sales rep doesn't know. Maybe that's happening on every call and you just don't know. That's the only customer. And so what Twine is trying to solve is like pulling that. So you have across all your sales and CS calls, here is a comprehensive, somewhat objective view of all this data that you can be an input to the that you were asking of like, how do I make these decisions? I think you kind of do this like back and forth loop of what is our strategy, which is a company strategy, which feeds into your product strategy. And what do we, in this nearest horizon, how are we trying to impact the market? And you can pull in all these data points and have a conversation with your leadership team or others in the business and try to understand what can we do now to like differentiate our product or push into this new market, whatever we've decided. And let's just focus on that. Now, in the background, you're keeping a pulse on like, because the market's always shifting, customer needs, especially now, like more than ever, technology are changing, different customer expectations and needs evolve. So you kind of have this like steady stream and continuous pulse on what's happening, but you really need to focus on your strategy and not just blindly respond to the loudest customer or even the most common support issue that might come up. That might be the answer, but I think you need to start from first principles of what is our take on the market? How do we think we can win it? Do we still believe that to be true based on what we're hearing? Yes, no. And then develop a product approach that can execute on that.
Do you believe in creating product North Stars? Like something that I'm curious to tap into is this balance between kind of big, bold vision that sort of spans, I don't know, several years, maybe even, as opposed to granular improvements here and there. And something that I personally experience often, and I'm like, as a designer, I'm like, well, how do all of these different granular things that we're doing in different parts of the product connect to the broader vision? Are we actually going to create this serious impact? Like if we look at our effort, over the course of, I don't know, 1-2 years and look back, did we actually make substantial, serious improvements?
I think you need to always have a view of, I'm not sure how far in the future. It depends on the size of your company, to be honest. But I think a North Star could be a 3-year thing. It could be a metric that you're going after. It could just be like a statement that is a take on the impact you want to have on the world that's a bit more subjective. I think it's always helpful to have a 1-year view of what the product could look like. And usually that's through some prototype or some actual visual thing, and along with some statements you want customers to be saying about your product or your offering in a year. And I think you want to kind of check in on that maybe every quarter, maybe every 6 months, of just like, let's look at the next, it's like a rolling view of where you're racing toward. I do not think that should be a list of features. I do not think that should be a list of it might be a roadmap, but a very fuzzy one as you get beyond the next 3 months. And usually that's like the head of product or the founder that's helping craft that. And I think this, as visual as you can make it, the better, because it'll help people like truly understand it. And then on your day-to-day, it's like, what can we do this week, this month, this quarter for our area of this vision to like actually execute on it? And you just fun just getting stuff out and learning. And then you have some time where you just pop out maybe at the end of the month and be like, are we on track toward the 12-month thing? Are we too in the weeds? Has our vision of what the 12-month thing should be evolved based on what we've learned? Are we on track to a 3-month big milestone that could be a sign that we're on track to the 12-month thing? And through that, you can one framework that's worked for me is thinking of like a portfolio view of what percentage of our time are on just quality of life improvements versus like new functionality versus the one big new thing that is newsworthy. It's going to go on the marketing site. For what percentage for each rolling 3 months do we want to focus on these? And it's not always a static thing. Like it might be we've done a bunch of big things. We need to get back to just like polishing and improving the experience. Just focus on that versus the next quarter, we're going to do like 2 big things. And so you just need to talk about it as a team.
What is the percentage that you would like typically recommend to assign to quality of life improvements?
As I said, it fluctuates over time. I think you should be at least like a quarter of your time.
Quarter.
It could be more. Like it depends on the nature of the product. Like I imagine if you're building a product like where someone's in there every day, it is like a productivity tool where every little interaction, if something's off, really annoys them, the experience over time, you probably want that number to be higher. If you're more of like a set and forget type product, it's probably less important to like sweat every single detail and always be fixing that. But you kind of just listen to your customers. If support volume's going up and people are complaining, you're getting a lot of churn, people are confused, dial it up for the next 3 months just to like get that resolved.
Can you actually double click on like what are some of the business metrics, so to speak, to advocate for quality of life improvements?
It's a great question. It's hard to know. Like I personally, things like NPS and all that, I don't really like those as measures of product team success or quality of life. I think it's a bit subjective. So you can look at support volume of someone's complaining, customers are complaining about this 10% of the time, that goes down to 2% of the time after you made some changes. That's probably good. So that's one very tangible thing. I do think some of it's quite subjective though. You should be, ideally, not everyone can do this as easily, but dog fooding, you're using it, you should have an opinion, like, is it better or not? And that's a bit of it comes down to your own taste as a product manager, designer, engineer. But if you're also running regular like usability testing or doing some research where you're actually watching people use your product, you can kind of pick up on it. I know that's not the most helpful answer,
No.
But
This
it's
is
hard to quantify.
yeah. No, I mean it's something that I personally struggle with often about. Like I think designers naturally have the desire to want to, improve and refine experiences. And sometimes there is, at least in my experience, there's like, well, why do we need to refine this? The feature is there, it works, on paper, so to speak. And then you kind of like trying to figure out, well, how do you really communicate that, it's actually, guys, like it's important. We need to refine it.
The thing, again, that's simple, not easy, is the opportunity cost of like doing a thing. So if we're going to spend a week changing some basic interaction in the product, which might be a really important interaction, what are we foregoing doing or further? And that's the question. That's the hard discussion to have. Is this actually worth it versus that new feature we could add, or we could do some innovative testing of some new technology or new approach? How are you spending your time, and when is it appropriate to do that? I think that's the tough discussion to actually have. And often, again, some products compete on the user experience because it is like how they win in the market. And so I was that 20, if someone's listening to this and that's their kind of product and company, 25% is probably absurdly low. It's over 50%. Like every interaction, I imagine like the people who are first building Figma as an example, where every little shortcut and stroke and how you interact with it like that, there's so much thought that must have gone into that for years of just like polishing, refining for products like that, that it probably needs to be closer to 50 to 75% because it is how you win. And when you're having those trade-offs of opportunity cost, it probably is much easier to think about all these little micro interactions and taking the time
Or
to
the
get them right.
cursor, right? Like one of the recent examples, cursor product that, I mean, I hear a lot from engineers about like how intuitive and great it is, the whole auto suggest experience. I keep hearing about how great of an experience it is in a product that is like so technical at the same time. What is your we talked earlier about like the North Star and the roadmap, and you mentioned it's great to have visuals. Like what are the formats? What are your favorite formats to sort of communicate those bigger, longer term ideas? Are you trying to create, I don't know, high fidelity prototypes or like videos or visuals, or maybe just text that is compelling?
Usually I find starting with video clips of customers talking about this hypothetical better world or the key problem that the better world solves. I think starting with that, just getting the team to rally around actual humans talking about this. Then I think some mixture, I don't think a high fidelity prototype is necessarily worth it and actually could be detrimental because then people assume that is the thing they're building. I think low fidelity prototypes, so you can kind of get a sense of like interactions and flow of experience is important. And then supplementing that with a couple higher fidelity visuals that can help it really sink in for people. Like, oh, I get what that would be really compelling if we could get to a world like that. I think that's important. And then not prescribing a full roadmap, but saying, usually I like to think of it as like Lego building blocks. Like we did this, and then that would allow us to do this. And then that would like you're just building up an experience. And in order to get to that thing, we need to have these 3 blocks in place. And then that gives us the permission and allows us in the market to like win on this big new thing. So how does all this stuff kind of work together to compound to a far better experience for the customer and hopefully a much better business?
Yeah.
Is the way to express it.
What are the tools that you use to keep track of this like progression and the features? Like I know that there are some products like Product Board or Aha. Like, do you use some of those or no?
I never have. Granted, I haven't worked at massive companies, so perhaps those are more useful there. For me, it's just comes down to you got to write something down. It has to be concise. Whatever I tend to use Notion, but you can use any product components to write stuff down. It's very hard to write down a strategy concisely. And I think the act of doing that can be quite helpful. And then having some visuals, which could be like a Figma prototype. It could be a slide deck in Canva with like a few screens in it that kind of tells the narrative. Usually that's what I will use. I try to not force a strategy into a task management or more like thing like those tools you mentioned.
What is the, like, in terms of the, maybe a very specific question, but I'm personally super curious. Like when you write a product strategy, what is the language that you would use in a set? Like you said that you don't want to write down it as a feature, right? So what is the style of the language almost that you're choosing? Are you writing it as a, I don't know, like high level story? Maybe you can give an example of the format that works for you to capture that.
I think the longer term it is, the more like abstract storytelling is important.
Hmm.
So if you're painting a picture of a year from now, I think writing it as a more narrative of either through the eyes of a customer, like this is a day in the life of the customer in a year from now, or this is how people would describe our product a year from now. I think that's quite helpful. For things that are a bit more tactical and like 3 month, 6 month horizons, I find it's just helpful to write down. This is the whole Amazon working backwards thing of what is it? How would you describe it to the market? And I think that forces a lot of really positive things. One thing that we do at Twine to be very tactical is we actually design the website. Whatever if what we're doing isn't going to change the website, why are we doing it? Even if we're like refactoring something, it should be fast. Like the word fast should be like performance or something should be somewhere in there. But usually for a new functionality or a new product or whatever, how would you describe it on the website and then work backward from that? So you might not ship that until it's ready, of course, but I think going through the act of actually high fidelity designing the marketing or alterations you would make to the page, how the copy is, what are the key things that you want to call out. We used to do this exercise back when I was at Atlassian called Build a Box. This like where you actually like used to buy software in a box. What goes on the box, like a box of cereal? What is the headline? What are like the features on the side panel that are like super important? On the back, you want like the tech specs. So like, how would you do that? That's a fun little actual physical activity to do with your team. Things like that are the equivalent of like updating the marketing site. We just choose to do the marketing site.
Yeah, that's cool. I heard an example sometimes used, like write a press release. I forget who's doing it. Maybe like Amazon, somebody else, kind of like, yeah, write down the press release of what it would look like. That kind of forces you to think in terms of like, what value does this bring to customers? Are they going to be excited about this? Maybe even down to creating little animations of the UI itself, like maybe not building out the entire thing, but a little like widget, like boom, like this is magic, right?
Yeah, having fake customer testimonials, like again, it's like, what do we want them to? How do we want them to? The thing we're doing, I think, is really helpful. And doing that before you build anything or create a backlog of stuff, because I think the problem is if you just build a backlog of, okay, let's go through and break down this feature set or new product. If you don't have the ultimate thing you're working toward, which is what you want to tell the market and your customers, you can get bogged down into like your prioritization gets a little off and you lose sight of what you're actually striving toward. And I find it's far helpful, obviously for alignment across multiple functions, but more importantly, like what the prioritization of what matters, what do we need to ship to like tell that story in a way that's compelling and is actually truthful that the customer would feel it once they use the thing.
I don't know if it's proprietary, but do you want to share what is the like a headline product vision for Twine in the next year?
Oh, we're in the process. It's funny you should say, like, you just yesterday I was talking about designing the website. We're doing the website design for this right now, so we're still kind of piecing it together, and we're early enough in our journey that I wouldn't say we've thought through a year, but I think what we're trying to do is think through all the reasons that go-to-market teams and product teams are misaligned. And yes, having customer insights from those calls is one part of it, but it's also, if you're a product manager giving an update and you want to close the loop with every rep who's talk to a customer who asks for a thing, how do you do that? If you want to understand competitor battle cards that's real-time updating based on actual video clips of customers comparing you to the competitor, how would that look? So almost this AI task force that not only grabs data, processes it, and gives you reports, but gives you artifacts that can be quite useful for a number of these roles within each function. Without getting too specific, that's the way we're kind of thinking about it.
No, that's cool. Who do you think of as your maybe one of the? I imagine you may have several like primary user types, but do you think of researcher as one of your user types? And like the question kind of that I wanted to explore is what is your take on the future of research and kind of where professional researchers fit in this world that is going to be augmented by AI and products like Twine and others are making searching for those nuggets easier. Like where does the human fit in? It's a big theme, like the whole democratization of research. That is, I don't know, maybe share some thoughts around that.
Yeah, so I think so for Twine, I would say we're a data point that will help product teams make. We are giving you some information from the field. I think proper like generative research arguably is more important now than ever. I know there's a lot of debate about like the impact of AI, but I think understanding your customers and exploring new concepts with them through research initiatives, making sense of that data to actually build qualitative insight is more important than ever. Everyone has access to all the data. And so the point I was saying before about product managers and product teams generally just being able to intuit what are customers thinking, where are they likely going, and understanding them deeply requires a ton of really, really powerful research. I think within that space, and Dovetail obviously has a great company doing a lot of really interesting things here to help those people really understand and explore new ideas and concepts and make sense of what customer ideas are coming through research. I think I can help in the same way that I think we're helping a workflow that's very manual today to give certain people superpowers in the organization. I think research tools like Dovetail will continue to do that and make understanding, exploring new concepts with your customer far more efficient and rich with customer data.
Yeah, I forgot the name, but I've seen actually earlier today and some time ago, there is a couple of startups that essentially offer automated qualitative research. I have not tried it personally, but it sounds like, the agent is going to go out to the participant. It's going to be audio interface. They're going to ask the question, hear the person's response, run, I don't know, analytics in the transcript, get back. I have not personally I've seen it, but I've saw like a discussion on LinkedIn earlier about like researchers pitching in and just saying like, what is going on? This is crazy. But I also probably it's inevitable. Like, what's your take on that? Like automating, like how far can the automation go with research? And is it dangerous?
It's a heavy question. I haven't used any of those tools myself, so I'm not as informed on it. I generally think that using AI to automate workflows that are quite manual is helpful and people should embrace that. I still think for research, there needs to be a human in the loop at some point. And if AI can give you access to a lot more data, because it's so efficient, you can like have 10 to 100 times more conversations, even if the transcripts are generated via AI and there's some summaries that are sent with you. I think you still need to go through and listen to what customers are actually saying and make sense of the output. I don't think trust an AI to like go out and interview people and then tell me what to do. I would maybe trust to do the logistics of setting up interviews and asking questions repeatedly. Because if you think of it like sending a survey out, you're not talking to the person asking questions. This is just like automating that through AI conversations. I think it's a similar type of data, but it doesn't fully replace, in my eyes, like understanding your customer. You still need to, at some point, I think, make sense of what they're saying. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there are people who are much more bullish on that whole thing should be completely automated. Maybe it will be eventually, maybe like several roles, but I don't think we're there yet, personally.
Yeah, like I'm personally excited about the power that AI is going to bring to, as you say, like augment routine tasks. Like I'm personally super excited to, do less of the routine. I also am a little bit like concerned for people starting to draw like wrong conclusions about like, oh, this is easy. Look, there is a response. this is the data, or look, there are buttons on the screen. This might be a user interface. This is great. It's almost like, are people going to still be able to really judge the outputs? Maybe if they're successful, if their products are successful, I mean, I guess more power to them. At the same time, as someone who is deeply cares about the aspect of the craft, I'm kind of like, well, I don't like there's a high potential for just having a lot more like mediocre products and just like things out there, like art and music and everything. It's like on one hand, it's super exciting, but on the other hand, it's also just, yeah, a lot of potential for a lot more mediocre stuff.
I 100% agree. And I think I often I think engineering is a good analogy. Like, yes, you can do, obviously vibe coding and all this stuff is like, well, how people are talking about, but I think
Yeah.
eventually that's all going to fall apart and won't scale. And you need a very architecture level thinker who can understand what is good and bad in terms of the output of the AI and understand how it will all fit together. And they are the human in that loop. And they might be part of a product, might be an entire product. And so, and there's probably less humans in the overall workflow of technically building a product. But the idea, I think that you're just going to spin up a bunch of the idea of me using AI as a product manager to build a product and sell it to someone that might work for a bit. But as soon as it gets any level of complexity, I would be terrified to buy a product for myself in that sense. And so I think it's a somewhat similar thing in research. Yes, you can automate some of these things, but you still require the person who deeply understands research best practices and how to understand and connect and use your human intuition to map that to what it means for what we should do. And I still think you need that. So the research team, like the engineering team, might be smaller in the future. But the people who are there will need to deeply understand the craft and have superpowers by automating all the other distractions from the actual.
Let's dive into Twine. When we talked off camera, you mentioned that you are a team of 4 people. You have a, real product, great marketing website, with a very few amount of people. And the area that I'm curious to also explore there is like kind of the blend of roles, so to speak, or rather the potential for that blend as opposed to like a specialization of, of like a highly skilled expert. Yeah. So maybe first, maybe just describe like who does the team at Twine consist of? Like who are the people behind it?
The core skill or craft that each of the people brought in, as we've discussed, product management. We have someone whose background is in sales, someone whose background is in design, and someone whose background is in engineering. And so all of us by design do more than just that and fill the gaps with other things. But those are the core skill sets that comprise our team today. But our designer, for instance, does a lot of marketing content and brand and all that. Engineer leads in and does a lot of product stuff. I'm do finance stuff. Our person helps us with our positioning and marketing and stuff and support. So there's obviously a blend of roles, but those are the core skills that comprise.
What do you think of this cross dissemination of roles, like, engineers starting to do design, designers starting to do engineering, like product managers doing all of that? Where do you I've heard some people who are very bullish on the idea of it's not going to matter what is your role. Don't even think about the role anymore. Think about it just as being generalist. It's an interesting concept. I'm curious if that's how you see it, or do you still see the need and importance of specialization, like going deep into the craft?
I think there is definitely a generalization happening, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's not a full generalization. If you're building something more than just a prototype or early V1 of a product, I think for the company, you still need people who have a deep skill and understanding of a craft. But I think the idea that designers generally can think more and spend more of their time doing what traditionally might be a product management task, engineers thinking more like designers or whatever it is, I think the blending is a good thing. Because I think the silos before at some companies that I've seen, it's almost so they're like hard silos. Like product management must do this. Once they're done with that, then design will do this, and once they're done with that, then engineering will do this, and that has so much inefficiency. And so if you just look at like what is the most efficient way to understand what to build it, to get it out, and then iterate on it, I think blending helps a lot with that. It can short circuit decisions, and creates less like handoffs that shouldn't need to exist. But I think if you have a team of all engineers building a company, you can probably guess where some of the challenges might be, or it might become obvious that where they're leaning into AI. It might not. It might be they might get 2 years into their journey before they need someone in sales or product or design. But I think eventually you kind of still need some of the core crafts. You probably just need less of them.
Did you utilize some like, I don't know, out of the box design systems, for example, when you were starting Twine, or did you decide to, I don't know, go like all custom? Like, are you using a lot of out of the box pre-built things, or do you tend to create everything kind of proprietary?
It's a bit of a mix, and really, I just trust our designer to determine that, and our engineer, honestly, because the more bespoke and like unique something is, the harder it is to build and maintain. So I let them decide that most of the time because they're better at it than I am. But I do think we have a general principle of, is this a feature in the product or a part of our brand that we want to be known for, or is a key differentiator? And if so, spend more time on that. For things that are not and are more table stakes features or things you need on the website, optimize for speed. And often that involves just grabbing something off the shelf, whether it's design or otherwise.
How long did it take you before you were able to put the first version of the product to like a real customer, so that like from the time that you started working to having like that MVP version?
It was about 2 months, 3 months.
That's very
I
quick.
think maybe a little, depends where we probably gave something to someone quicker than that, but I would say when we'd been using it, we were like, let's see what people think. It's probably two and a bit months.
Yeah, that's super fast. And do you make product updates like how often, every 2 weeks or even faster than that?
Maybe every 2 hours.
Really?
I think,
Wow.
yeah, I think we're not always working on product updates. Sometimes we're working on the website, but we're continuously updating it. Definitely every day, either the website or the product itself.
What about, I'm curious, maybe also like kind of a more technical question to some extent, but what do you guys do for testing in terms of like, so you have a relatively small team, right? Like, and quick releases. How do you make sure that things don't break?
We're very fortunate that our CTO is very good at spotting these things and definitely always does very high quality work. That makes it easy. Whenever we release an update, I will immediately just use it and just make sure it's all good. If it's something that's big, obviously we'll put it behind a feature flag and we'll use it ourselves for a period of time. But when you're just like constantly iterating, usually it's just, I trust our designer and engineer to test it, make sure it's all good, and then I'll be the checkpoint. And sometimes there'll be whenever we catch stuff, it's little stuff like alignment issues or little micro interactions that we use the wrong component or spot. And Chris has, just to be clear, our engineer, I'm sure, has a number of like automated tests that go into every release that we do. I'm just not in the weeds with that stuff.
And do you ever use external help like contractors for different things, or do you keep everything in-house?
Everything's been in-house so far. We've talked about for some like animation design for the website going outside, but for the product, absolutely everything's been in-house. And well, everything to date has been in-house and will continue to be, especially on the product side.
Awesome. I'm curious to dive into maybe a little bit, different theme about your personal journey of working inside of the companies, like being an employee in-house and starting the company and, being the CEO. You mentioned earlier that it took you some time to get to the point of getting that confidence, right, of starting something on your own. I mean, how does it feel now that you are doing it? And in comparison to how it was just working as an employee?
Different, like the thing that you have to be the thing pushing things forward, and you kind of set the pace for the company. And so that for at times can be a bit of a burden. At times it's fun and I love it. But knowing that every day, if I just for a week, hypothetically, it was just like, oh, I don't really care this week, that will be felt by everyone in the company immediately. And so I think that can weigh on you quite heavily every day. But, and then just, it's up. There's no one else that's going to solve these problems other than myself and our small team. Just trying to, I think some of that is freeing, and that it's just like, we'll just do it, move quicker. And so we probably, for some companies that, I don't know, like if I look back at myself and reflect on what I was doing, even in leadership roles at other companies, I think now that I've been a founder, I like understand some of the frustrations that the founders I was working with had, not as, of course, sometimes with myself, but just generally with the company and the attitude and the pace and culture and all that. And so I think it's been a bit of a shift of just do it, just like go, like just, oh, well, there's a reason we're not doing this. Well, then go fix that. Like why? Just go figure it out. And a team of 4 people, you just do that. Companies, you don't have the agency, or even often you do have the agency, you just don't think you do for a number of reasons. And it's been quite a shift.
Do you find yourself kind of working in a different way as you've operated yourself when you were in-house, kind of like even doing, product development? Did you sort of shift certain things and doing things differently?
Yeah, I think there's a different mental approach. Like even if you're like my last 2 companies before this, I was the head of VP of product, but I'm still working for a founder and it's their company. And so even if they've given me a responsibility to go do a thing, it's still theirs. It's their baby. I'm just kind of looking after it for a bit. I think that for me, I always felt a very strong obligation to that person or people, because they've taken a chance on me. They're giving me an opportunity to do this. They trust me. I think I often would pause and be like, okay, is this what they would want? Is this, and sometimes the answer to that question is very different than what I might think we should do. So how do I reconcile that? Whereas now it's my company and my co-founder and I. And so that's gone. It's like, it's my thing. I don't have to think about that. And so I think that does short circuit a lot of things. I think that's probably been the main shift. And that trickles through to everything: product development, brand.
And you're working on site, all at the office, or remotely?
We work in office primarily. Obviously, people work from home every once in a while, but our default is in office together.
Is that kind of a conscious decision because you believe that it's important for people to be next to each other? Or, I mean, it so happens that you guys are in the same city and it's easy. Like, I mean, how important do you think is it to be in the same space?
I think for the 4 of us, it definitely helps. I think in the early days where you're still doing things out together, being physically in the same place does have a huge benefit. In my experience, as a thought exercise, if we just made it completely remote, what would change? I think some things might slow down. I think it's very nice to be able to just have ad hoc conversations. It might have nothing to do with the company level. I think that is very hard to do remotely. I don't have like a philosophical stance against one way or the other. I just think for us at this stage, it's working and we all enjoy it. So we'll keep.
Do you think like if you were 100 people company at some point, would you want to try to keep a big office and people in house, or would you at that time to kind of make it more remote or hybrid?
Don't know. I think I would always want some amount of like office space where some people are in most days. It'd be very hard without that. As you grow a company, different functional areas require different things. So if you're like in sales, if we hired a salesperson on the other side of the world, we'd probably give them the option for an office, but if they wanted just to be remote, that's probably okay. But I think we take it on a case by case basis. And then obviously like the cost of like maintaining an office comes into play at some stage. Yeah, we'll see. And I think like culturally, the norms kind of shift over time. And sometimes what you prefer might not be what's the current expectation in the market. And so you have to consider that too, if it
Yeah.
impacts your ability to grow the team.
Do you factor in the capabilities of the technology, so to speak? Like let's say right now, AI is machine learning is capable of doing X, but you're thinking ahead. Well, we believe that in a couple of months, that thing is going to be available. So we're going to start to factor it into the product experience. Like, I don't know, do you think in terms of these ways, like when you're building something that is AI powered?
Yeah, even just the company. I think part of the reason we're still quite small is we believe that AI is just going to get better at this stuff. And I really don't want to, I'd prefer to never overhire. It will happen at some point. But so we've been trying to lean into that. And even if AI can't do an internal task today, it's in the probably soon bucket. And then as it relates to our product, like, yeah, of course, it's hard to have a product strategy without having a strong opinion on where at least the big players like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and all these companies, where they're going to go, how that's going to evolve, and where in the stack they will push or not push. What's a sustainable way to differentiate your product in the future? Does that matter now? These are the things we need to talk about and figure out what we build and what we don't build. Because you can build really anything. Like, you can build a lot of stuff now. So I think it makes it harder to just be really clear on this is a differentiator that we can actually sustain. So let's make sure we spend a lot of time doing this. We believe this because this is our take on where the world is heading. Very hard to know for sure, but at least have the discussion regularly. We could be completely wrong, of course, but we try to think through that lens.
Yeah. I'm curious also about, so I think we're still at early stages of figuring out the audience of Product Craft podcast, but I think there is quite a mix of designers, but I don't want it to be design, exclusive, so to speak. And which is kind of why I wanted to bring different people from different disciplines. I'm curious, what would you say is our kind of maybe top of mind advice for designers to work better with product managers, like based on your experience? Like, what are some of the common maybe pitfalls or areas of friction? And what do you wish maybe designers knew about how to best or better work with product managers in your experience?
It's a great question. My answer is going to maybe be a bit generic, because I think every product, every combination of the product that you're building, the designer and their skill and strengths, weaknesses, how they like to work. Similarly with the product manager, strengths, skills, weaknesses, how they like to work. I think having a conversation of what do we want to do together? What are our ways of working that we've established, of like how we like to interact? What are you responsible for? What am I responsible for? Where do we overlap? Like literally draw on a whiteboard the Venn diagram and then revisit that periodically. Because as we said, like a bit ago, like the generalization of these roles is definitely happening. And so often the way I've always tried to frame it is, I think designers having more tools available to them, and often great ones do think like product, like they can often just do the product management. In my experience, like you maybe don't even like need a product manager there in the future for a lot of these teams. And I think that is a really positive evolution of the craft, of like having a designer who can think that way. And then the question for a product manager, and I think the way to have this discussion with them is, if they didn't have to do half of what they're doing today, and that could be distributed elsewhere, which might be some to a designer, like what are the other things that this glue role can do? It might be going out and doing a bunch more research. It might be sitting down with the finance team and understanding like how to price this new thing you're building. It could be just going on a customer tour and like actually like showing them the prototypes. And I think encouraging the product manager, and again, they're all different. This is a bit my own flavor of what I think product management is, being a bit more flexible to what the designer and engineering leader need from them, I think is good. But at its core, I think most of the issues that I've run into are a misalignment on ownership of the work and not acknowledging skills and ways of working every day that people just don't openly talk about. And then it just festers underneath the surface, and like people step on each other's toes in the abstract sense, and that causes a bunch of problems.
What is this ideal dynamic, so to speak, between like a product manager, designer, and engineer? Do you encourage designers and engineers to work more together directly and sometimes kind of like, take a step back and see what happens? Or do you try to be part of the process like at all times and almost like in the middle of things, orchestrating?
I think designers and engineers should be working together side by side. Like I would literally sit next to them if you happen to be in a physical space. And when you're building stuff, like having these, there shouldn't be like a handoff. Like, of course, there is like some initial work that needs to like be done on both sides of planning. But then once you're actually in the thick of it, just going back and forth, I think is definitely the preferred way for me to do it. And then from a product manager's perspective, I personally prefer to like be there to like help out and unblock things if questions come up, or if a new blocker, which might have nothing to do with how you build it or how you design it. It might just be like, do we have buy-in from this other product team, or what does leadership think about this, or be there to unblock and just allow things to move more smoothly. I think is good.
Mhm.
But at times, like perhaps the PM can just be gone from that day to day and be off exploring a new thing, and because they just have they know, the group knows when to pull the other person back in to have a discussion, but they've kind of all agreed up front, like on what they're trying to do. But generally speaking, rule of thumb, no handoffs, everyone's sitting around together, even if it's virtually, and just working through the stuff together, I've always found is more efficient and gets to the right outcome. I use right as like what the customers need and the business needs more effectively. Now, the one caveat I'll say is there are times where you just need to like put your headphones on and focus on a prototype or writing software. And so I think having some general rules of thumb of like when to do that versus to collaborate is obviously very important as well.
Brian, where can people find you, or like if they're interested to learn more about what you do or maybe get in touch, what's the best way to learn about you and get in contact?
My email address is probably the easiest, brian@twine.com. Our website is twine.com. You can always add me on LinkedIn, and yeah, emails are always open. Those are probably the easiest ways.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate your time. Yeah, like you shared some amazing insights. I'm personally super grateful for your time and sharing the knowledge. You sound like a really great person to work with.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. All I can do is share what I've experienced. I don't know, it could all be wrong, but some of it at least has worked at least a little bit for me. But I'm hoping, if people want to talk more about any of these topics, I'm always looking to learn more from others, and we'll definitely be listening to your future guests to level up my expertise on things.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.